Before time had a name, when the wind still whispered secrets to the sand and the stars hung low like the eyes of sleeping gods, there was harmony upon the earth. The Nile glided through the heart of Egypt like a silver serpent of peace. Its waters carried life from one horizon to the next, to the palm trees that swayed in quiet rhythm, to the papyrus that listened to the wind, to the people whose songs rose in praise of their king. And their king was Osiris, the gentle lord of light and rebirth. He was not the thunder of command, nor the iron of conquest. He ruled with the stillness of the sun at dawn, calm, radiant, inevitable. When he spoke, the fields listened. When he smiled, the waters deepened. And when he walked through his golden halls, it was as if the Nile itself followed in devotion. Beside him sat Isis, his queen and his mirror, whose wisdom was deeper than the night. If Osiris was the heart of Egypt, Isis was its soul, the keeper of its mysteries, the whisperer of life. Her hands could mend a broken stem or soothe a crying child, and in her gaze dwelled the patience of the moon. Together they were balance, earth and sky, day and night, birth and dream. The people of Egypt said their reign was like a long sunrise. Each day new light, each moment new warmth. Temples were built not out of fear but of gratitude. Offerings of bread, lotus flowers, and honeyed milk floated upon the waters. And when the sun set beyond the desert hills, torches were lit not to chase away the dark, but to honor it, for even night was sacred in the time of Osiris. There are those who said that Osiris could hear the voice of the Nile. When he stood upon its banks, barefoot and serene, he would listen, truly listen, to the whisper of the current. It spoke to him in ripples and sighs, in the song of reeds that bent toward his feet. He learned that the Nile carried the dreams of men and women, washing their hopes to the sea and bringing back renewal. So he taught his people to plant with its rhythm, to harvest with its patience. He showed them that the river's gift was not only in water, but in wisdom, that to flow was not to wander, and to yield was not to fall. It was said that one evening, when the air smelled of lotus and rain, Osiris sat by the river and closed his eyes. The horizon was violet and gold. The herons glided low, their wings brushing against the stillness of dusk. He breathed in the perfume of wet earth and smiled. He did not smile for himself, but for the land, for the people singing in the fields, for the stars that would soon awaken. And Isis, who walked beside him unseen, whispered, "You listen to the river as if it were your own heart." Osiris opened his eyes, soft and green as the river's depths. "Perhaps it is," he said. "For when I hear it, I hear life itself. And in its quiet, I hear you." Isis smiled, that small secret smile that could turn the air to light. The reeds swayed and the night grew tender. In the silence that followed, the first stars appeared, patient, eternal witnesses to a love that bound heaven and earth. Each year, when the Nile rose in celebration of its own return, the people gathered to give thanks. There were songs in every courtyard and laughter in every temple. The sky filled with the scent of roasted grains and incense, and music drifted through the night like gentle waves. Osiris walked among them, not as a distant god but as one of their own. He listened to their stories, tasted their bread, and blessed their children. Where he passed, lilies bloomed along the water. At his side, Isis spoke words of wisdom that became like seeds in the hearts of all who heard. She taught them the laws of kindness, the secrets of healing, the beauty of balance. And when the drums quieted and the torches burned low, she sang, a song of eternity. A song that said, "Nothing is ever lost, it only changes form." Even the wind seemed to pause when she sang. The stars leaned close. The waters hushed their murmur. And Osiris, standing beside her, felt that he ruled not because of power but because of love. But in every circle of light, there is a border where shadows wait. Among the laughter and golden torches, there was one who watched. Seth, brother of Osiris, born of the same divine blood, yet shaped from the fire of chaos. Where Osiris was calm, Seth was restless. Where Osiris listened, Seth thundered. He was the storm that envied the river's peace. He stood upon the edge of the festival, his eyes like burning coals beneath the mask of a smile. He saw the people kneel to Osiris with love, not fear, and it stung him like a wound. In his heart, something ancient and unquiet began to move, not hate, but hunger. Hunger for the light that was not his. And though the music played on and the laughter filled the night, the wind changed. It grew heavier, slower, carrying the taste of dust. Osiris felt it, faintly like the shifting of a dream. But he said nothing. For he believed that no shadow could darken a heart full of love. Isis, however, turned her eyes to the horizon, and saw, just for a moment, a flicker of red lightning over the dunes. As the days passed, Osiris continued his work, unaware that the balance had begun to tremble. He walked the fields at dawn, teaching men to honor the soil, to care for the beasts, to live by truth. He taught them to look to the stars not as distant gods, but as reminders that what is above is also within. He built schools of stone where the young learned to write the words of the gods. He built temples open to the wind so that prayers would rise freely, like doves to heaven. And everywhere he went, Isis was there, her presence a calm flame beside his light. She healed, she listened, she dreamed of the future. And in the quiet of night, when the world was asleep, she spoke to him of eternity. "Do you believe the world will always remain as it is?" she asked one evening, her voice no louder than the sigh of the river. Osiris smiled. "If we keep it in balance, why would it not?" "Because balance is a breath," she said. "It must be drawn again and again or it fades. Even light must rest in darkness." Osiris looked at her, and for a moment he did not answer. Then he said, "If darkness comes, I will welcome it. For without it, how would I know your light?" The wind carried their laughter down the river, past temples and fields, toward the endless desert where Seth dreamed his restless dreams. The seasons turned like pages of a slow and endless book. Under Osiris and Isis, Egypt breathed in rhythm with the stars. The floods came and went, the crops rose and bowed, the moon slipped through its silver phases and returned to its throne. Everywhere there was order. And yet, in the hush between one tide and the next, small cracks began to whisper through eternity. Far from the green breath of the Nile, the desert waited, vast, ancient, and forgotten. There, the winds did not sing but moaned, carrying grains of time itself. And in that emptiness walked Seth. He wandered between broken stones and ghostly dunes, his mind restless as the storm he commanded. He looked toward the horizon, where the green of the living land shimmered faintly, and that green mocked him. "All this life," he murmured, "and not a whisper of it remembers the desert that bore it." His words vanished in the wind, but his anger did not. It sank deeper into him like a root drinking fire. For in every smile offered to Osiris, Seth saw a wound. In every cheer he heard chains. The harmony that blessed Egypt was a mirror he could not bear to see. And so the desert, silent and patient, listened to its son's unrest. The dunes curved closer as if to shelter his thoughts. Somewhere beneath the sand, old forces, wild and forgotten, turned in their sleep. That same night Isis dreamed. In her vision she stood upon the river's edge beneath a sky of turning stars. Each star was a heart, each wave a breath, and all sang her name in whispers. But the song faltered. One by one the stars dimmed until only the moon remained, pale and trembling as if unsure of its place. From the west rose a shadow that swallowed the horizon, and with it came a sound like broken wind. She woke before dawn, her breath quick, her hands cold. Osiris slept beside her, his face calm as the sea. She laid her fingers on his heart and felt its steady rhythm. "The dream will not be," she whispered to herself. "I will not let it." And yet she did not tell him, for she believed that speaking darkness aloud could summon it. So she kept the vision folded within her like a sealed papyrus, and went to greet the morning. That day began as all golden days began. The markets opened with laughter. Children ran beside the river chasing reflections. The priests lit incense whose smoke rose in slow curls like prayers taking form. Osiris moved among his people with quiet joy. He touched the sick, listened to the elders, and thanked the farmers who brought baskets of wheat to his gates. He spoke to them not as a ruler but as a friend. And when he returned to the palace, he found Isis upon the balcony, watching the horizon where sand met sky. She smiled, though her eyes still carried the pale echo of her dream. "The people love you," she said. "They love the light," Osiris answered softly. "I am only its servant." He placed his arm around her shoulders, and together they looked out upon their kingdom. Far away beyond the reach of their gaze, the desert shimmered like a sheet of glass. When the Nile began to rise again, the priests announced a festival, 7 nights of song and flame to honor the balance between flood and earth, between life and stillness. It was a time when gods were said to walk unseen among mortals, blessing them in secret. Torches lined the river banks, their reflections quivering upon the water. The scent of myrrh and cinnamon filled the air. From every village came voices, thousands of them, blending into one hymn. Osiris listened, eyes half closed. He felt the sound travel through him like a tide. It was the heartbeat of Egypt itself. At his side, Isis held a small lamp. Its flame was blue, the color of eternity. She turned to him and said quietly, "So long as this flame endures, Egypt endures." He nodded, but the breeze that came off the desert flickered the flame for the briefest instant. Neither spoke of it, yet both saw. As the festival's 6th night drew to an end, a messenger arrived at the palace gates. He was wrapped in travel dust and bowed low before the guards. When brought before the throne, he spoke, "A noble of the West, my lord, sends a gift to honor your reign, a chest of cedar and gold carved with stars." Osiris smiled. Gifts were common during festivals. It was custom to receive them and bless their senders. But this chest was unlike any he had seen. Its surface shimmered as though light itself had been trapped beneath the wood. The carvings were precise, too precise, each star arranged in a pattern that seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. Isis approached, cautious. "It is beautiful," she said, though her tone was quiet. "And strange." Osiris laid a hand upon the lid. The cedar was cool, almost breathing. Its maker knew the measure of a man, he mused, tracing the design. Every inch speaks of balance. From behind the pillars, unseen by all, the messenger bowed once more. When he lifted his head, his eyes were not mortal eyes, they burned with the red of the setting sun. He slipped away into the crowd before anyone noticed. Night fell slowly, painting the sky in layers of indigo and gold. In the courtyard, musicians played harps whose notes fell like drops of rain. Osiris and Isis sat together, the mysterious chest before them, its golden lines glimmering in torchlight. "Will you open it?" Isis asked softly. "Not yet," Osiris replied. "Some gifts reveal themselves only when the heart is ready to receive them." He smiled at her, and the moment was gentle again. The air smelled of wine and lotus. The moon rose steady and white. Somewhere, a child laughed, the kind of laugh that made even gods remember joy. But in the silence between the harp's final notes, Isis felt something unseen watching from the dark. It was only a whisper, a tremor in the air, but it lingered long after the music had gone. Far across the dunes, Seth stood upon a ridge of stone. The wind clawed at his cloak, the stars wheeled above like a council of eyes. He looked toward the city of his brother, where torches shimmered like veins of light. In his hands he held a fragment of cedar, carved from the same wood as the chest now resting beside Osiris. He turned it slowly, feeling the smoothness beneath his fingers. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the sand, "tomorrow the light will kneel before its own shadow." The dunes did not answer, but the night shivered as if it understood. Morning came dressed in gold. The first light of the sun spilled gently over the palace walls, touching the columns, the gardens, the still waters of the reflecting pools. It was a peaceful dawn, the kind that seemed to hold its breath before the world began to move. Yet something unseen lingered in the air, like the faint scent of smoke long after the fire has gone. Osiris woke early as he often did, and walked through the colonnade with the calm grace of a man who loved his kingdom more than his crown. The people had already gathered in the fields, their voices rising like birdsong, greeting the day with laughter and work. He smiled as he watched them, feeling once again that familiar sense of wonder. Every breath, every life was sacred to him. He ruled not to command but to protect. Behind him, Isis joined him quietly. She moved like the dawn itself, soft, unhurried, filled with hidden strength. "The river is high," she said, looking out toward the horizon. "The fields will be rich this season." Osiris nodded. "The gods are kind," he said, though in his heart he believed that kindness was not a gift from the gods, but the result of harmony itself, the great rhythm between the earth and the heavens. The golden chest still rested in the great hall. It seemed almost alive now, as if the wood breathed with a rhythm of its own. The servants avoided looking at it for long. They whispered that its glow changed with the passing hours, that at night the stars above seemed to tremble in answer to its light. Isis had felt its strange pull too, but she said nothing. That night, when the moon hung low and full, Osiris ordered a gathering in the hall. Musicians came, nobles and priests filled the marble floor, and candles burned like rivers of fire. The mysterious chest stood in the center of the room upon a dais of carved stone, its golden sheen alive with reflections. Seth entered among the guests, his face hidden behind the calm smile of a brother, his heart a coil of shadow beneath his ribs. His voice was smooth as wine when he spoke. "My brother," he said, bowing low before Osiris, "the beauty of your reign humbles even the gods. I bring you a gift, though it may seem small beside your greatness. A game, if you will, to honor your wisdom." Osiris laughed softly, his eyes full of warmth. "A game, brother? You have always been the restless one. What sort of game do you bring me?" Seth clapped his hands and servants came forward, carrying a measuring rod of polished bronze. "This chest," he said, gesturing to the golden sarcophagus that gleamed under the torches, "was built with perfection in mind. It is said that whoever fits within it perfectly is the one for whom it was destined. Let us see, my lord, if fate favors you tonight. The hall rippled with laughter and curiosity. The priests murmured, the nobles leaned closer. It seemed harmless, even charming, a brother's jest on a night of celebration. Isis, standing beside the throne, felt her heart tighten. She looked at the chest, then at Seth, and for an instant saw something in his eyes, a glint like a knife beneath silk. Osiris smiled nonetheless. If it will please you, brother, I will humor your game. He stepped down from the dais and approached the chest. The hall fell silent, all eyes following his calm figure as he ran his hand along the smooth golden surface. Truly it is a marvel, he said. The craftsmanship is divine. Seth inclined his head, his voice steady. Perhaps it was made for a god. Osiris chuckled and began to lie down within the chest. The fit was perfect, too perfect. The crowd murmured in awe. See how it matches him exactly, someone whispered. It is as if it were made for him. But in that moment, before Osiris could rise, the air changed. Seth's voice, once smooth, now rang sharp as metal. For him indeed, he cried. And with a shout, his followers, hidden among the guests, rushed forward. The lid fell like thunder. The chest groaned shut, its seals clamping like jaws. Isis called out his name, but the sound was drowned by the rush of movement, by the clash of wood and stone. Seth's laughter echoed through the hall, a sound like breaking sky. Let us see how light endures in darkness, he cried, and before anyone could stop him, he and his followers lifted the chest and carried it toward the great doors. The torches flickered violently as if the air itself recoiled. Isis tried to run after them, but the crowd surged in confusion. Her voice broke against the chaos, his name lost in the storm of footsteps. The chest was gone before dawn. Across the city, silence fell like ash. When morning came, the Nile was still. The people looked to the palace, waiting for their king, but no voice came from its gates. In the throne room, Isis stood alone. Her hands trembled against the empty dais. The golden chest was gone, and with it the breath of the kingdom. For the first time in an age, Egypt felt the weight of silence. Seth had fled into the west, carrying his brother's coffin with him. The desert welcomed him with its endless emptiness, its winds whispering songs of power. He buried the chest deep within the sands, where the sun burned the ground white and the stars dared not shine. There he stood over it, feeling the pulse of Osiris fade beneath the layers of dust. Now, he said to the wind, the river will forget your name. The fields will wither. The songs will die. He turned away, leaving only his footprints, soon swallowed by the endless tide of sand. In the palace, Isis wept. But her tears were not of despair. They fell upon the floor like drops of the Nile itself, and where they landed, lilies bloomed. She wrapped herself in linen and silence, her heart heavy yet unbroken. She knew the path she must walk. She would find him. Even if it meant following the river to its end, even if it meant speaking to the stars themselves. The nights that followed were long and restless. She walked the halls in quiet, her hands brushing the carved walls where his name was written. Each hieroglyph seemed to pulse faintly beneath her touch, as though it still remembered his voice. I will not let the desert take you, she whispered to the silence. And though there was no answer, a soft wind moved through the room as if to promise that he had heard. The moon rose high that night, round and bright as a shield. Its light spilled through the open windows, covering the floor in silver. Isis stepped into it and lifted her face to the sky. "Guide me," she said. "Wherever he has gone, let me follow." The stars flickered in answer, and far to the west, beyond the edge of the living world, the sand stirred. The Nile flowed on, patient and eternal, carrying its secrets to the sea. The people waited for the return of their king. They still offered bread, still lit their lamps, still sang to the dawn, for they believed that light could not die. And somewhere in the distance, the river whispered softly, as if to remind them that every ending is the beginning of another story. The nights grew longer after the king was gone. The stars seemed dimmer, the moon smaller, as if the heavens themselves mourned the fall of the light. The songs that once rose from the riverbanks grew softer each evening until even the fishermen who sang to the waves began to whisper their prayers instead of singing them. In every home, a small lamp burned for the return of Osiris, but its flame trembled like a frightened heart. Isis wandered the halls of the empty palace. Each step echoed like a memory, each shadow seemed to hold a fragment of his voice. She passed the throne where he once sat, the garden where he had spoken to the children, the temple where he blessed the harvest. All were silent now. The scent of incense still lingered in the air, a fading trace of devotion. She stood before the great columns carved with his name and traced the symbols with her fingers, her lips barely moving as she whispered, "You are not gone. You are only hidden." That night she prepared to leave. She wrapped herself in a dark linen cloak and placed around her neck the amulet of protection, a small stone shaped like a throne, her sacred symbol. She carried no gold, no retinue, only faith. Before she left the palace, she walked to the balcony that overlooked the Nile. The river glowed faintly beneath the moonlight, wide and still as glass. She closed her eyes and spoke to it as though it were alive. "Show me his path," she said softly. "Carry me where he has gone." The wind rose gently from the east. The surface of the water rippled once, and she took that as her answer. She set out at dawn when the sky was pale and the air was cool. She walked along the riverbank, her feet leaving faint prints in the wet earth. The people saw her passing and bowed their heads, for they knew their queen had taken upon herself the burden of a goddess. Some tried to follow, but she bade them stay. "The heart must walk its own road," she said kindly. "Yours is here with the fields and the children. Mine is with the wind." For many days and nights she walked. The Nile flowed beside her like a companion, sometimes wide and calm, sometimes narrow and quick. She slept upon its banks, wrapped in the scent of lotus and silt, listening to the soft murmur of the water. In her dreams she heard his voice not as words but as a feeling, warmth, patience, love. It guided her onward when her body ached and her heart felt heavy. She crossed villages where the people still lit fires in his name. They welcomed her as a pilgrim, not as a queen. She ate what they offered, blessed their children, and moved on. Wherever she passed, the land seemed to stir, as if remembering its promise. Fields that had grown dry bloomed again after her footsteps. The old said the Nile itself flowed more sweetly when she drew near. One night, as she rested beneath a palm grove, she saw a great bird flying above the river, wings wide, feathers dark as the night sky, eyes burning gold. It circled once, then vanished toward the west. She took it as a sign. "He waits there," she murmured, gazing into the darkness beyond the dunes. "Where the river dies he waits." The next morning she left the Nile behind. The green of the land faded into the gold of the desert. The wind became her only companion, carrying whispers that might have been prayers or memories. She walked without fear. The sun burned fiercely above, but she moved as though protected by an unseen veil. Each step sank softly into the sand, and the earth seemed to guide her. In the silence of the dunes she began to hear voices, not of men but of the world itself. The stones hummed faintly. The air shimmered with meaning. In the distance, a storm moved slowly across the horizon, and in its heart she saw a glint of gold. She followed it for 3 days and nights, until the storm passed and left behind a single mound of untouched sand. There she knelt and placed her hands upon the ground. Beneath her palms she felt it, the faint echo of life. She closed her eyes and whispered his name. The wind stilled. The heat faded. For a moment, everything, even time, seemed to hold its breath. She began to dig. The sand was deep and heavy, but she did not tire. Her fingers bled, her arms shook, yet she did not stop. The more she uncovered, the cooler the air became, until at last her hands struck something smooth. She brushed the sand away and saw it, the golden chest, half buried, its carvings gleaming faintly through the dust. Her breath caught. She fell to her knees beside it, trembling. "I have found you," she whispered. Her voice broke and tears fell upon the surface of the wood, mixing with the sand. She pressed her hands to the lid. It was cold, yet she felt warmth beneath it, a pulse, faint but real. She wept then, not from sorrow but from love so vast it could not be contained. She sat beside the chest until the stars returned, their light falling like silver dust across the desert. She sang softly, a lullaby she had once sung to the children of Egypt. Her voice carried through the dunes, gentle and steady, and even the wind seemed to listen. "Sleep, my beloved," she murmured. "The world still breathes your name." As dawn began to paint the horizon, a shadow approached. It was not Seth, but something older, a whisper of the desert itself, testing her resolve. The air shimmered, and a figure appeared before her, tall and made of shifting sand. Its voice was low, ancient, and vast. "Why do you disturb the silence of the desert, Queen of Life?" Isis bowed her head but did not look away. "I come for what was stolen," she said softly. "The silence you guard is born of sorrow, not peace. I will bring back balance." The shadow tilted its head, as though listening to something only it could hear. "What you seek to awaken cannot return as it was. Will you bear what follows?" "I will bear it," she said simply. The figure studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. The wind rose again and the air grew warm. "Then take him and remember, to breathe life into death is to invite both." When it vanished, Isis laid her hands once more upon the golden chest. She whispered ancient words, words older than temples, older than men. The symbols carved into the lid began to glow faintly, first gold, then blue, then a color that had no name. The air thickened with light. A tremor passed through the ground, like the heartbeat of the world. She did not open the chest. She only touched it and felt that what was inside still heard her, still waited. She knew she could not stay. Others would come. The desert was not empty and Seth's eyes were everywhere. She covered the chest again with sand, marking the place with stones arranged in the shape of a lotus, a symbol of rebirth. Then she turned east and began her long journey back toward the living lands. The sun climbed higher behind her, but the heat did not touch her. She walked as one carrying light within. In her heart there was no despair, only quiet certainty. The world had changed, but the rhythm of life had not ended. The river still flowed. The stars still turned. Love once born could not die. And so the goddess walked, alone but unafraid, her footsteps soft upon the sand, her eyes fixed upon the distant horizon where the sky and the earth met, the place where endings and beginnings were the same. The road that led Isis northward was long and without sound. The desert stretched endlessly before her, a sea of gold and white that shimmered in the sun until the horizon dissolved into light. She walked at dawn and rested only when the heat grew unbearable. At night she lay beneath the stars, wrapped in the whispering breath of the dunes. She ate little, drank from the flask she carried, and trusted the wind to guide her. Sometimes it came from the west, carrying the scent of the sea, and sometimes it rose from the south, warm and dry. Each time she closed her eyes and listened, she thought she could almost hear the faint murmur of the river, calling her back to the world of the living. When she reached the coast, the air changed. The dunes ended suddenly in cliffs of pale stone, and beyond them she saw the dark blue line of the great sea. The wind that met her there was cool and filled with salt. She had never seen water that did not flow, yet here it stretched without end, moving with slow breaths that shimmered under the sun. She knelt and touched it. The taste of salt clung to her fingers, sharp and foreign. "He crossed you," she whispered to the waves. "Somewhere beyond your face he waits for me." A white bird glided above her and then turned north, and she rose to follow it. For many days she walked along the coast, until she reached a place where tall trees grew and the air smelled of cedar. The land there was bright with color, rich with flowers she did not know. People spoke a language she did not understand, but when they saw her they bowed their heads, sensing something divine about her calm. She asked them, with gestures and few words, for the way to the great city that faced the sea. They led her to Byblos. Byblos was unlike any place she had known. Its walls shone white in the sun, and its harbor was filled with ships whose sails were painted in reds and blues. Perfume drifted through the streets, and the sound of bells echoed from its temples. Yet even in this place of beauty she felt the same undercurrent of longing that stirred the world since Osiris had fallen. The people smiled, but their eyes were weary. They sang, but their songs did not linger. She moved through the markets like a shadow, wrapped in linen and silence, asking quietly if anyone had seen a chest of gold carried from the desert. Some shook their heads. Others looked away quickly, as if the question itself unsettled them. One evening, as the sun sank into the sea, she came to the gates of the royal palace. Its doors were carved with vines, and the air smelled of cedar resin and incense. She saw servants carrying bundles of the fragrant wood into the courtyard. "What is this for?" she asked a woman who stood nearby. The woman smiled shyly and answered, "For the great column in the hall. It is said that when it was cut from the forest, the scent of it filled the air for 7 days. The king himself ordered it brought here." Isis's heart quickened. She thanked the woman and followed the servants inside. The palace hall was vast and filled with golden light. In its center stood a column unlike any other. It rose from the floor to the ceiling, smooth and glowing, its wood deep and warm like sunlight through amber. And though the air was filled with music and voices, Isis heard nothing but the quiet rhythm that pulsed faintly within the column, a rhythm she knew as well as her own heart. She stood before it, trembling, and whispered, "Beloved, even here you breathe." She did not move for a long time. The courtiers passed by her without noticing, thinking her one of the foreign pilgrims who came to offer praise. When the hall emptied and the lamps were lit, the Queen of Byblos entered. She was a kind woman, dressed in soft linen, her hair bound with silver. Seeing Isis still standing before the column, she asked gently, "Who are you, traveler? And why do you look upon our sacred pillar as though it were your child?" Isis bowed low. "I am a wanderer," she said softly, "seeking what was lost. There is life within your pillar, a presence you do not see. If you would allow me to stay, I will bring blessing upon your house." The queen studied her for a long moment, sensing the quiet power that surrounded her. Then she smiled. "You may stay. There is peace in your eyes, and my house has need of such peace." Isis remained in the palace for many days, speaking little, working quietly among the servants. Wherever she went, calm followed her. The sick recovered, the restless slept. The queen grew to love her and asked her often to stay close, to tell her of her homeland. Isis spoke of the river, of the harvest, of the harmony that once ruled the world. Her voice soothed everyone who heard it. The king too began to notice her, not with desire, but with reverence. "This woman carries something of the divine," he said to his wife. "When she speaks, even the noise of the city fades." On the seventh night, as the moon rose high above the cedar roofs, Isis went to the hall alone. She carried with her a small vessel of perfumed oil. Standing before the great column, she poured the oil at its base and sang softly, her voice a whisper that seemed to awaken the air itself. The flame of the lamps flickered. The wood glowed faintly. She placed her hands upon the smooth surface and spoke his name. The column shuddered, and for a moment she thought she heard his voice answer, faint, distant, but alive. The next morning the queen found her there kneeling. The fragrance of cedar filled the air so deeply that it seemed to come from the stone itself. The queen, moved by the sight, called for the king, and together they listened as Isis told them everything, of her lost husband, of the golden chest, of the desert and the river and the silence between. When she finished, there was no sound in the hall except the whisper of the sea outside. The king lowered his head. "You have brought holiness into our home," he said. "What you seek we will not keep from you." The masons were called, and with reverence they opened the base of the column. When the last layer of cedar was lifted, they found within it the chest of gold, still shining softly in the dim light. The fragrance that escaped filled the palace, so rich and sweet that those who breathed it felt tears upon their faces. Isis reached out and touched the lid. "He has waited," she said, her voice no louder than a prayer. The king and queen ordered that the chest be given to her. "Take him," the queen said, "and may the gods of your land bless ours for all time." Isis bowed deeply. "You have given life where there was loss. Your kindness will be remembered in the stars." That night she left the palace quietly. The chest was placed upon a small boat, and she sailed down the coast beneath the moonlight. The sea was calm, the wind gentle. She sat beside the chest, her hand resting on its surface, her eyes fixed upon the horizon. The stars above seemed to move with her, guiding her eastward toward the mouth of the Nile. As dawn broke, the coastline of Egypt appeared, washed in pale light. The waves carried her gently into the river's arms, and the smell of lotus returned to the air. The people along the bank saw her passing and knelt, though they did not know it was their queen who drifted past them in silence. The chest glowed faintly under the morning sun, its golden light reflecting upon the water. She brought him to a hidden place in the marshes, where the reeds grew thick and the birds sang softly at dusk. There she built a small shelter of woven rushes and placed the chest within. Every day she came to it, kneeling in prayer, whispering his name. The earth around her grew green and fragrant. Lilies bloomed where her feet had touched the mud. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. For a time peace returned. Even the wind was gentle, as though the desert had forgotten its thirst. But beyond the marshes, unseen and restless, the shadow of Seth stirred once more. Days passed in the silence of the marsh. The reeds whispered softly, the birds wove their songs through the still air, and Isis watched the light change upon the water. She spoke to the river each morning and each evening, her words rising like prayer. Sometimes she sang to the chest, and when she did, the wind seemed to quiet itself to listen. She believed that if she sang gently enough, he could hear her wherever his spirit had wandered. One afternoon the sky turned red with the light of the setting sun. The air was heavy and the marsh was still. Isis sat by the chest, weaving a garland of lotus flowers to lay upon it. She did not notice the shape moving through the reeds. Seth had heard of her return. The rumor had reached even the desert. He had come alone, his face hidden beneath a hood, his eyes burning like embers in the shadow. He watched her from a distance, silent as the dusk. For a moment he felt something strange, a flicker of memory, of the brother he had once walked beside, but it passed. His heart had long since hardened. When night fell he moved closer. The reeds bent around him, the water swallowing the sound of his steps. Isis had gone to the river bank to gather fresh water, leaving the small shelter unguarded. The moon rose pale and cold. Its reflection trembled across the surface of the marsh and touched the golden chest with a faint shimmer. Seth stepped forward. He stood over it, breathing slowly, and whispered, "Even now they speak your name. Even now they forget mine." His hand brushed the smooth surface, and the glow deepened, as if the chest itself recognized the hand that had sealed it. His lips curled into a bitter smile. "If your name cannot be forgotten, then it will be scattered." He lifted the chest easily. The reeds rustled as he carried it to the river. The water hissed at his feet. He raised his arms and let out a cry that rolled through the night like thunder. Then he broke the chest open and cast its contents into the water. The sound was not loud, but the world seemed to shiver. The moon dimmed, the reeds bowed, the air grew still. He turned and vanished into the darkness. When Isis returned, she saw the empty space where the chest had been. Her heart stilled, then broke open. She fell to her knees and pressed her hands to the wet ground. "No," she whispered. "No, not again." The wind came suddenly from the west, strong and dry. It tore at her hair and filled her eyes with dust. She called his name into the night, but only the echo of her voice came back to her. Then she rose, trembling, and turned to the river. Its surface shimmered faintly in the moonlight, as though hiding secrets beneath it. She walked into the water until it reached her knees and spoke softly, "Show me where he rests." The current moved against her legs, steady and warm, like a hand guiding her. She understood. The pieces had drifted apart. She would have to find them. She would not rest until she did. For many nights she searched. She followed the river as it wound through the land, through fields and valleys, through places where the lotus grew thick and through places where the water turned dark and still. She spoke to fishermen and to travelers, to the spirits of the reeds and to the stars. Each time she found a fragment, a relic, a sign, a whisper of his presence. She wept and wrapped it in linen. She carried these pieces close to her heart. The people she met along the way saw her and did not know who she was, but they felt peace in her presence. They offered her food, shelter, and prayers. Wherever she passed, the air seemed lighter, as though the earth itself took comfort in her purpose. Nephthys, her sister, heard of her wandering and came to her. They met beside a small lake at dusk, the air cool and blue. Nephthys embraced her, and for a moment Isis allowed herself to rest in that human warmth. "You should not walk alone," Nephthys said gently. "The night is full of eyes that do not sleep." Isis shook her head. "I must walk where he has been. Only the river knows the path and I must follow it." Nephthys did not argue. She only took her hand and said, "Then I will follow you." Together they searched. They moved through villages and deserts, along the borders of the world. They found fragments of gold and fragments of bone, each one faintly glowing with life. They gathered them tenderly, wrapping them in white cloth, laying them upon a small altar they carried with them. When they rested, they sang soft hymns, their voices mingling in the still air. The birds grew quiet to listen, and the stars seemed to lean lower. At last, guided by a dream, they reached the place where the river met the sea. The air there was full of salt and wind. The water spread wide and endless. In the shallows they found the last piece, half buried in sand, glimmering faintly in the moonlight. Isis knelt and lifted it. Her hands trembled, but her voice was calm. "Now you are whole again," she said. "Now we begin anew." They built a small shelter near the water's edge. The waves murmured ceaselessly like breath. Inside the shelter, they laid out the gathered pieces upon a bed of linen and flowers. The air filled with the scent of myrrh and cedar. Isis lit a lamp and placed it beside him. Its flame burned steadily, unmoving in the sea wind. She looked down upon what she had gathered and felt both grief and peace. "You are here," she said softly. "The world may change, but you are here." Nephthys stood beside her, silent. In the glow of the lamp their faces looked alike, two sisters, two lights in the darkness. "Will he rise?" Nephthys asked. Isis did not answer at once. She reached out and brushed her fingers lightly through the air above the linen, tracing invisible symbols. "He will return," she said at last. "But not as he was. The earth has changed. We will bring him to life, but his kingdom will be elsewhere." They stayed through the night watching the flame. When the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Isis began the ancient rites. She spoke words that had not been heard since the world was new, words that drew the breath of the sky and the pulse of the earth together. The air grew thick with light. Nephthys knelt beside her, lending her strength. They worked until the sun rose fully, until the sea shimmered like glass and the wind stood still. When at last Isis lowered her hands, the air was full of quiet, and in that quiet was life. She turned to Nephthys and smiled faintly. "It is done." Her voice was barely a whisper. The light in the small shelter flickered once and steadied again. The world seemed to sigh, as if something long awaited had come to rest. Outside, the sea moved gently, and the waves carried the sound of a heartbeat back to the shore. That day the sisters sat together by the water. They did not speak much. The sun was warm, the wind gentle. They watched the horizon until the light began to fade. In that stillness, Isis felt his presence, not beside her but everywhere, in the wind and the water, in the rhythm of the world itself. She knew that he had not truly gone. He had changed as all things change. She closed her eyes and smiled. In the distance, the first stars appeared, shining pale and quiet above the sea. The sea stayed calm for many days. The sisters tended their shelter in the marshland and waited, speaking softly to the waves as if they were listening. When the night winds came, the reeds whispered in answer, and sometimes, beneath the surface of the water, a faint light moved as though something still breathed below. Isis no longer wept. Her grief had changed its shape. It was now quiet, strong, and full of patience. She began to dream again. In her dreams she stood on the edge of the world, where the sky bent down to touch the sea. There she saw Osiris, no longer broken, no longer bound. He stood in a soft radiance that was neither day nor night, surrounded by stars that drifted like seeds. His eyes were calm. He did not speak, but the silence between them was full of meaning. When she reached out to him, her hand touched light, and in that light was warmth, and in that warmth life. When she awoke, the same warmth lingered in the air. She knew what it meant. The world had changed, but the rhythm of creation still flowed through her. That morning she went to the water's edge, where the waves lapped gently against the reeds. She knelt, placed her hands upon the earth, and whispered words that only the elements could understand. The sky grew still. The light deepened. From that moment, a spark within her began to grow. It was the continuation of Osiris, the promise of renewal, the child who would one day stand against darkness. Days turned to weeks as the seasons shifted quietly around her. The world held its breath, and even the desert winds softened their voice. Isis moved through each day with calm purpose. She gathered herbs, tended the fire, and sang to the river. The people who lived nearby came to her for healing, though they did not know her name. They called her the Lady of the Marsh, the one who spoke to the wind. When she touched their hands, their pain faded. When she smiled, they forgot their fear. She asked for nothing but silence in return. At night, she watched the stars and listened to the voice of the world. It was faint but clear, like the murmur of water beneath ice. It told her of the balance that bound all things together: life and death, light and shadow, silence and song. She knew then that Osiris had not died but had passed into another realm. The pulse of the earth was still his pulse. The cycle of the Nile was still his breath. He had become the rhythm that held the world in order. When her child was born, the air was filled with light. The reeds bent toward the small shelter, and the birds fell silent as though in awe. Isis held him close and whispered, "You are the hope of the living and the bridge to the unseen. You are Horus." His eyes opened, bright as the morning sky, and for a moment, it seemed that the whole world exhaled in peace. She wrapped him in linen woven with prayers and laid him upon her chest. The days that followed were gentle. The river flowed softly, and the breeze carried the scent of lotus. Nephthys remained with her, keeping watch through the nights. The child grew quickly, his laughter light as the wind through papyrus. Isis guarded him from the eyes of the world. She knew that Seth still wandered beyond the dunes, restless and waiting. She hid in the marshes where the reeds grew tall enough to veil even the moonlight. The animals became her companions, the birds who sang to lull the child to sleep, the jackals who guarded the paths, the crocodiles who kept the curious away. Each evening she sat beside the water and spoke to Osiris. "He is strong," she would say softly. "He carries both of us within him." The waves lapped against the shore as if in reply. Sometimes she thought she saw a shape in the reflection of the water, the outline of a man made of light, watching her with quiet pride. Seasons passed and Horus grew. His eyes were keen, his movements sure. The marsh became his world, a place of peace but also of learning. Isis taught him the songs of the gods, the wisdom of balance, and the language of the wind. He listened well. When he laughed, the birds answered him. When he was silent, the water rippled as though listening. He asked her once, "Where is my father?" She smiled and touched his hair. "He is in every breath you take," she said. "He is in the river that feeds the land, in the stars that guide you home, and in the silence that listens when you speak." He accepted her words, though he could not yet understand their weight. But as he grew, he began to dream, dreams of a vast hall filled with stars, of a throne carved of light, of a gentle voice calling his name. When he told her, she only nodded. "He speaks to you," she said, "and one day you will answer." Far away in the red heart of the desert, Seth heard whispers of the child. The thought of Osiris reborn through flesh made his heart burn with fury. He sent his spies to the marshes, but none returned. The gods watched in silence. Some pitied him, others turned their faces away. For even they knew that the cycle was greater than any one will, and that what had been broken must be made whole again. Isis knew that the time of hiding could not last forever. She built a small shrine to Osiris beside the water, where the flame of a single lamp burned each night. It was said that its light could be seen far out to sea. The fishermen who caught sight of it bowed their heads, believing it to be a star fallen to earth. In the stillness before dawn, Isis would sit beside the sleeping child and close her eyes. She would see Osiris seated upon a throne of silver in a realm of quiet waters, surrounded by the souls of the just. His voice would come to her like the memory of music. "Guard him," he would say. "His day will come, and through him the balance will be restored." She would answer softly, "I will guard him with all that I am." And so she did. Through the turning of seasons, through the rise and fall of the river, through the long nights when the stars were veiled and the world felt heavy, she remained. Her faith did not fade, for it was not built on hope but on knowing. The world itself seemed to hold her promise. When Horus was old enough to walk beside her, they left the marsh. The land greeted them as they passed. The people saw them and felt a quiet stirring in their hearts, though they did not know why. Isis said little, only that they were following the river back to its beginning. The boy walked with his head high, his gaze clear, the shadow of destiny already in his steps. In the distance, the desert waited once more, vast and silent under the turning stars. Somewhere beyond its edge, the storm of Seth gathered strength. But the river flowed on, calm and certain, carrying mother and child toward the horizon where the first light of dawn began to bloom. Horus grew as the river grew, quiet and steady, learning from its rhythm. His mother watched him and said little. There was wisdom in her silence. She taught him by gesture and example, not command, how to move softly through the reeds so as not to disturb the herons, how to read the wind on the surface of the water, how to listen when the earth itself seemed to breathe. When he spoke, his voice carried a calm that did not belong to children. When he laughed, it was a sound that lifted even the stillest air. Isis sometimes sat apart and listened. She saw both herself and Osiris in him. In the stillness of the night she would trace her fingers through the sand and whisper, "He is readying himself for what must come." The marsh that had hidden them for so long began to change. The reeds grew taller, the waters deeper, and more often than not, strangers passed nearby. Isis felt the world leaning toward movement again. She saw the signs, the restless birds, the heavy air, the sharp light of the moon. She knew the time of peace was drawing to its end. One evening she called Horus to her. The sky was full of the last light of day, and the river shone like bronze. "You have learned to walk with the world," she said. "Now you must learn to stand before it." He looked at her with quiet curiosity. "Why?" he asked. She took his hand and placed it over his heart. "Because the world forgets. Because what was torn must be made whole again. You are not only my son, you are the child of balance. One day you will stand before your uncle and the storm will test you. When that day comes, remember what I have taught you. Do not meet fire with fire but with light. The river yields to all things, yet it carves the hardest stone. He nodded, though the meaning was still larger than his years. That night he dreamed of a vast sky divided in two, one half filled with sunlight, the other with whirling sand. Between them stood a single figure of gold, holding out his hands. When he awoke, the dream lingered like mist. As he grew, he began to wander farther from the marshes. He met people who told him stories of his father, though they did not know to whom they spoke. They said Osiris had been a king who brought peace to the land, that his brother had cast him into the desert and the people had mourned him. Horus listened and felt the slow stirring of something deep and old within him, not anger but a kind of clarity. He began to understand that he carried within him both the memory of the lost and the promise of their return. One day, as he rested beneath a tamarisk tree, a voice spoke to him from the air. It was neither loud nor near, but it filled the space around him completely. "You have his eyes," it said. Horus looked up. The tree branches were still, the sky pale. In the air shimmered a faint light, forming a shape like a bird with outstretched wings. "Who are you?" Horus asked. "I am Thoth," the voice replied, "keeper of the word, witness of the balance. Your father rules in the place beneath, and his reign is just. But the world above still trembles. The storm that began with your uncle's envy has not yet spent its strength. It must be met, not with vengeance, but with truth. The time draws near. You must go to the council of the gods." The light faded, but the warmth of it remained. Horus rose and returned to his mother. She saw the change in his eyes and knew. "It is time," she said simply. Together they left the marsh. The journey was long, through lands of silence and lands of song, through valleys where the wind spoke in the voices of the dead and mountains where the air was clear as crystal. Wherever they went, the people bowed to them without knowing why. They felt in them something older than memory, something that promised the return of balance. At last they reached the edge of the desert where the first temples had been raised to the gods. The air there shimmered with heat and holiness. The pillars were carved with the faces of those who had come before, their eyes calm and unchanging. In the center of the temple burned an eternal flame. Isis touched her son's shoulder. "From here you will walk alone." He hesitated. "Will I see you again?" She smiled. "You will see me always, in the water and the wind. Go, Horus. The world is waiting to remember itself." He stepped forward into the temple. The air grew cool. The flame flickered and rose, and from it emerged figures of light, the gods who watched over creation. They surrounded him, their presence like music. He bowed his head, and the eldest among them spoke. "You are the child of Isis and Osiris," the voice said, deep as the earth itself. "The son of Renewal, the heir of justice. The world has long lived in shadow. The storm must end. Will you bear this?" Horus raised his eyes. "I will." "Then rise," they said, "and meet the desert." He turned from the light and walked out into the open air. The sun burned overhead. The wind stirred, and in its heart he heard laughter, the bitter laughter of Seth. The horizon darkened. The sand began to move. Horus stood still and closed his eyes. The teachings of his mother filled him. The calm of the river, the patience of the earth, the knowledge that light does not fight the dark but fills it. He opened his hands and called to the wind, "Let the world be whole again." The storm answered. The wind rose slowly, gathering the sand into great spirals that climbed toward the sky. The desert darkened as though night had come before its time. Seth's voice echoed through the air, sharp as broken stone. "So," he said, "the boy has come to stand before the storm." Horus did not answer. He stood with his feet in the sand and his eyes half closed, listening to the wind. The storm circled him, but his breathing stayed slow and even. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but the sound carried through the roar like a thread of light. "You are not my enemy," he said. "You are the part of the world that has lost its balance." Seth's laughter rolled across the dunes. "Words," he said. "Your father used them too, and they did not save him." Horus opened his eyes. The air shimmered between them. "They did," he said softly. "For he is not gone." Then the sand moved. It rose like a wave and struck him, but he did not fall. He stepped into the wind, and where he passed the storm broke apart. The desert filled with light, not the harsh light of the sun, but a soft gold that glowed from the air itself. Seth moved within it like a shadow, his eyes bright with fury. Again he struck, and again the light bent but did not break. The gods watched from the edges of the world, silent. They saw not a battle of strength but of will. The earth itself trembled, the sky swayed, and the river far away slowed its flow to listen. Horus spoke again, his voice calm. "You fight against yourself, uncle. The darkness that fills you is only the absence of what you once were. Come back to the balance." For a moment the storm faltered. In that stillness, Seth saw reflected in Horus's eyes the memory of the days before envy, the time when the brothers had walked side by side beneath the same stars. The image cut deep. He roared and gathered the storm once more, but the roar carried sorrow now, not triumph. Horus lifted his hands, and the light that shone between them spread outward. The wind softened. The sand fell. The storm unraveled like smoke. When it was done, Seth stood before him, breathing hard, the fury gone from his face. He looked smaller, older. "I have lost," he said. Horus shook his head. "You have returned." Seth looked at him for a long time, then turned away and walked into the horizon. The desert accepted him, and the wind began to smooth away his footprints. The light faded slowly. The gods descended from their watching places, their forms gleaming like the edge of dawn. They surrounded Horus and spoke together. "The balance has been restored. Your father reigns in the realm below, and through him the just shall live again. You, Horus, will rule the world of the living. Keep it as the river keeps its course, by flowing, not by holding." Horus bowed his head. "I will remember." From the western sky came a soft glow, and within it a figure formed, bright and calm. It was Osiris, clothed in the light of the afterlife. His eyes were gentle. "My son," he said, "you have done what even the gods could not. You have ended the storm without ending the storm's brother. Through you the circle remains unbroken." Horus stepped forward and knelt. "Father," he whispered, "the world is yours again." Osiris smiled. "It was never lost. It only waited to be seen." He turned his gaze toward the east, where the river wound its silver path through the land. "Go," he said. "Rule with the wisdom of your mother and the patience of the water." Then he was gone, his light sinking slowly below the horizon. Horus stood alone in the desert, the last of the storm fading behind him. The wind was warm now, and the sand shone pale and smooth under the rising sun. He breathed deeply and began to walk toward the river. When he reached its banks, the people were waiting. They had seen the strange light in the sky and felt the trembling of the earth. They knelt as he passed, though he told them not to. "Rise," he said gently. The world belongs to all who live in balance. He climbed the steps of the temple where once his father had stood. Isis was there, her face serene, her eyes full of quiet pride. He went to her and bowed his head, and she placed her hand upon it. "You have done what was meant to be," she said. "Now remember, peace is not a place to reach but a rhythm to keep." He smiled, and together they turned to the people. The river glimmered beside them, carrying light from the sun into every field and every home. The air was filled with the scent of grain and the songs of those who worked the earth. The world breathed again. That night, when the stars rose over the calm waters, Horus walked alone to the temple's highest roof. The sky was vast and full of life. He looked up and whispered, "Father, the balance holds." The wind moved softly through the palm leaves, and in that sound he heard the answer. Below him Egypt slept. The lamps in the houses flickered, the river whispered against its banks, and the desert lay quiet under the moon. Somewhere far beyond sight, Osiris ruled in the realm of the just, guiding the souls who came to him. Above, the stars turned slowly in their endless circle, and between heaven and earth, the breath of peace moved like the tide. And so the age of harmony returned. The name of Osiris was spoken again with love. The songs of Isis filled the temples, and the symbol of Horus shone over the land. In the stillness of the night, when all else slept, the river carried their story onward, a story without end, soft as the sound of water over stone. The night after the great peace, when the stars burned clear above the sleeping land, Osiris sat upon his throne in the quiet realm beneath the earth. Around him stretched the fields of the blessed, wide and green beneath a sky of soft gold. The air there was not the air of the living world but a living breath itself, gentle and endless. The souls that had crossed the river walked among the lotus ponds and tall grasses, speaking in voices that were like wind through reeds. Osiris watched them with calm eyes. There was no sadness in him now, only the still rhythm of understanding. He no longer ruled by command but by presence. His voice was the flow of the river, his thought the turning of the stars. When the newly dead came to him, led by Anubis, they did not tremble. They knelt, and Osiris asked nothing more than truth. Each soul carried a small light within, the echo of its own heart. Anubis would place the heart upon the scale, and beside it the feather of Mot, the measure of truth. Osiris would watch as the two balanced. Sometimes the heart trembled and the feather lifted slightly. Sometimes they came to rest perfectly still. He never judged harshly. He only asked, "Have you walked with kindness? Have you loved without measure?" And when the soul answered with honesty, even if it had failed, he would smile and say, "Then you have known life, and life will not forsake you." The souls who passed into the fields of peace did not forget the living. Their dreams drifted upward like mist, touching the world of men. In quiet moments, the living would feel them as memory, as intuition, as comfort in the dark. Thus the realms remained joined, and the river of existence flowed unbroken between them. One day Isis came to him again. She appeared as she had when the world was new, radiant, serene, and timeless. The light of the living world still clung to her hair, and her eyes held both sorrow and joy. She stood beside his throne, and he rose to greet her. No distance separated them now. Their union was not of body but of being. "The balance holds," she said softly. "Our sun watches over the earth. The people speak your name with peace." Osiris nodded. "I have seen the light of their offerings. It shines here in this place, and the souls are warmed by it. The world has learned to breathe again." They walked together among the fields, where the souls of the righteous wandered in quiet harmony. The breeze carried faint music, the memory of life. Isis touched the heads of those she passed, and the lilies bloomed in her wake. "Does it ever end?" she asked after a while. Osiris smiled faintly. "Nothing ends. Each breath becomes another. Each death is only the turning of the page. What changes is the reader." They stopped by the great river that wound through his kingdom. Its waters shimmered with silver light, reflecting both the sky above and the depths below. Osiris knelt and let the current flow through his hands. "This is the same river," he said. "It runs through every realm, through dream, through life, through death. It remembers all that has ever been." Isis knelt beside him and listened. For a long time they said nothing. The sound of the river was soft and endless. Somewhere far above, on the earth of the living, Horus stood upon the temple steps and gazed at the same stars. Osiris lifted his gaze as if he could see through the worlds. "He learns quickly," he said. "He governs not as a conqueror but as a keeper of the rhythm. The Nile follows him. The people thrive. The storm has slept." Isis smiled. "You taught him well." He shook his head. "It was not I. It was the silence that taught him, the silence that follows all things when we listen." They watched the souls moving through the fields, quiet as drifting leaves. "Even the lost find their way here," Isis murmured. "There is no exile from love." Osiris reached out and touched her hand. "There never was." The river brightened and the air shimmered. The sound of distant laughter rose, the laughter of children newly arrived and unafraid. Osiris watched them with eyes that held both eternity and tenderness. "Each soul that crosses reminds me of the day the river first learned to flow. The cycle is its own joy." Isis looked toward the far horizon, where the light deepened into gold. "Then it is true," she said quietly. "There is no death, only change." Osiris nodded. "Change and the remembering of love." They stood together a long while, watching the sun that never truly set. The souls moved gently through the fields, their forms dissolving into light as they passed into the farther realms. Above them, unseen, the world of the living turned and dreamed, its breath and the breath of the duet rising and falling together like the tide. When Isis finally returned to the world above, Osiris remained by the river, his reflection shimmering upon its surface. The waters whispered as they passed, carrying with them the voices of both the living and the dead. He listened, and in that sound was all creation, the laughter of the child, the sigh of the elder, the murmur of lovers at dawn. Each voice was part of the same song. And as the river flowed on, Osiris smiled. He knew that as long as there was love, the current would never cease. The soul arrived quietly. It had been carried on the long wind of breath that follows the last heartbeat, and when its eyes opened again, it stood before a vast horizon of gold and blue. There was no fear, only a deep stillness, as if it had finally remembered something it had known all along. A river ran through that place, calm, wide, glowing with its own light. The reeds at its edge whispered softly, their motion slow and rhythmic. The air smelled of lotus and sand after rain. The soul stepped forward and saw a figure waiting by the water's edge, tall and dark, his eyes bright like twin moons. "I am Anubis," said the figure, his voice low and gentle. "You have crossed from the waking world. Will you walk with me?" The soul nodded. It felt no weight, no hunger, only a quiet curiosity. The god turned and led the way along the river. They passed through fields where light grew instead of grass, where voices murmured softly like wind. Sometimes the soul saw shapes moving among them, others who had walked the path before, their faces calm and untroubled. "Is this death?" asked the soul. Anubis shook his head. "This is remembering. The body forgets itself so the heart can be known." They came to a hall whose pillars rose high and vanished into shadow. The floor shone like still water, reflecting the light of unseen fires. At the far end stood a scale made of gold, its arms balanced in perfect stillness. Beside it waited Osiris. The soul knew him at once. His presence was like the pause between two breaths, like sunlight caught in still water. He was not distant, but vast, as though the air itself bowed around him. "Welcome," Osiris said. His voice was warm, quiet, and endless. "You have walked the road of life. Do you carry peace within you?" The soul hesitated. "I carry what I remember. I have loved and feared and hurt. I've been both kind and cruel. I do not know if that is peace." Osiris's eyes softened. "Then we will see what truth remains." Anubis placed the heart of the soul upon the scale, and beside it he laid a single white feather, the feather of Mot, light as breath. For a moment neither moved. The air in the hall grew deep and still. Then the scales began to tremble, slowly finding balance. The soul watched. It did not plead or hide. There was nothing to hide from. It only listened to the quiet within itself. The feather settled. The heart stopped trembling. Osiris smiled. "You have spoken truly," he said. "Truth weighs nothing, for it is what remains when all else has gone." A door opened behind him, and through it came a soft light, warm and wide as dawn. The soul stepped toward it. "What lies beyond?" it asked. Osiris answered, "The same river flowing in another form. The same song sung in another key. Go and remember that love is the bridge between all things." The soul bowed and passed into the light. The air shimmered as it went, and for an instant the hall seemed filled with music, quiet like laughter far away. When it was gone, the scales stood still again, balanced perfectly in the golden light. Anubis turned to Osiris. "Will the river ever rest?" Osiris looked into the distance where the souls became stars. "It does not need to rest," he said softly. "It only flows." And the river of the afterlife whispered beneath them, carrying both silence and song, both the living and the dead, both beginning and end, one endless current of peace. The night in the duet was never truly dark. It shimmered faintly, as if each grain of dust remembered the light of creation. In that quiet glow, Isis walked beside the river, her reflection following like a second flame. She came often now to her husband's realm, not out of grief, but to understand what the living could not see. That night she sought the one who had always stood at the heart of all things. Mot, the spirit of truth and balance. She found her in a garden of still air and silver water, where the leaves did not move and the stars reflected in perfect symmetry. Mot stood at the center, her tall feather rising from her crown, her eyes deep as the horizon. "Goddess of truth," said Isis softly, "I come to learn what cannot be spoken in the world above." Mot turned to her, and when she smiled, the air seemed to breathe again. "You already know, Isis of the river. You have walked both paths and held both grief and joy. You have learned the lesson of balance in your own heart." Isis bowed her head. "I have learned love and loss, light and shadow. But balance still feels like something delicate, something that can be broken." Mot stepped closer. "It is not delicate. It is alive. Balance is not the stillness of stone but the movement of breath. It sways, it bends, it listens. The world endures not because it stands still, but because it keeps returning. Isis looked into the mirror of the water. The stars above and their reflections below touched tip to tip, forming an endless circle. Then even sorrow has a place? Mott nodded. Sorrow reminds love of its depth. Night reminds dawn of its promise. Without the space between, nothing could become. For a while they stood in silence, watching the reflections shift. The river beyond the garden murmured softly, a low eternal sound that was neither near nor far. Why do men fear death? Isis asked. Because they mistake it for loss, Mott replied. But death is only the silence between two verses of the same song. Even gods listen to that silence. Isis knelt and touched the surface of the water. It rippled outward, distorting the stars for a moment before returning to stillness. And truth, she whispered, where does it rest? Mott placed her hand over Isis's. Truth does not rest. It moves like the current. It is not something to possess, only something to live within. It has no edge, no shape, no end. The wind stirred faintly then, as though the world had exhaled. The feather upon Mott's head quivered, and a light passed through the garden, gentle and golden. Isis felt her heart lighten. You speak as if even the gods must learn. We do, Mott said simply. We learn through those who love, and you, Isis, have taught even the river how to heal. Isis smiled. The sound of distant laughter reached them, carried on the wind, the laughter of souls who had found peace. She felt Osiris's presence, calm and near. Tell me one thing more, she said quietly. Will the balance last? Mott's eyes reflected both the stars and the deep water. It will last as long as there are hearts that seek it. Every act of kindness keeps it alive, every gentle word steadies its weight. Even when the scales tremble, they never truly fall. Isis rose, her cloak whispering against the ground. Then there is hope in every breath. There is, said Mott, and every breath is the universe beginning again. They embraced, and when Isis stepped away, the light in the garden dimmed to its soft glow once more. She walked back toward the river, her steps soundless upon the silver sand. The current caught her reflection, carrying it forward as if guiding her home. As she walked, the air filled with the faint scent of lotus and cedar, the fragrance of both life and eternity. The duet hummed gently around her, the pulse of existence steady and kind. She looked up at the unseen sky and whispered, May all hearts remember the balance. And far above, on the surface world, a breeze moved through the palm leaves by the Nile, stirring the lamps that burned in the temples. Somewhere a sleeping child turned in peace, dreaming of water and light. The night was long and quiet in the kingdom of Horus. The river slept beneath a silver mist, and the wind that drifted through the palms carried the scent of wet stone and grain. The people had gone to rest, even the temples were silent. Only the stars moved, slow and patient, like thoughts that had never forgotten their meaning. Horus stood on the terrace of his palace, watching the sky. The world was calm now, and yet inside him there was a weight he could not name. Peace had come to the land, and still he felt the pulse of something unfinished, as if a note within the music had yet to be played. He closed his eyes and whispered to the air, Father, the river flows as you wished. Why does my heart still tremble? The night answered him with silence, and in that silence he felt sleep descend like a tide. He did not fight it. He lay upon the cool stone and let the world fall away. In his dream he walked along a river that was not of earth. The water shone like starlight, and every drop carried a reflection of the sky above. There was no sound of wind, no echo of time. Only the quiet rhythm of his steps and the soft glow that guided him forward. Then, across the current, he saw a figure standing on the opposite bank. The light around it was gentle, like dawn through mist. Horus knew that presence before it spoke. "Father," he said. Osiris smiled. His eyes were deep and endless, holding both love and the calm of the eternal. "My son," he said softly, "the river still remembers you." Horus crossed the water, though the surface did not ripple beneath his feet. He stopped before his father and bowed his head. "I have done as you asked," he said. "The land is whole again. The people live in peace. But I feel as though I am waiting for something I cannot name." Osiris looked at him for a long moment. "You have restored balance," he said, "but balance is not stillness. It is the turning of the world, the pulse of all that is. Peace is not an end, it is the breath between moments." "I do not understand," Horus admitted. "If the storm is over, why do I still hear thunder in my heart?" Osiris placed a hand upon his shoulder. It was warm and weightless. "Because you are alive. The world within you still changes as the world without does. Even a calm river moves, my son, it only hides its motion beneath the surface." They walked together along the shining water. Above them, constellations drifted, weaving stories into the night. "Do you see them?" Osiris asked. "The stars remember every deed, every word, every breath. The light you see now began its journey long before you were born. What you do in the world travels the same way. Peace is not the absence of change, but the trust that change will bring harmony again." Horus watched the stars, their faint paths crossing like threads. "Then even loss has a place?" Osiris smiled. "Especially loss. Without it, love would never know its shape." They came to a place where the river widened and vanished into light. The air shimmered softly, and the sound that filled it was both music and silence. Osiris stopped there and turned to him. "You will return soon," he said, "but remember this: rule not with the desire to preserve what is, but with the wisdom to guide what will be. The land will change. The people will change. Let them. The river never demands that its banks remain the same." Horus bowed. "Will I see you again?" Osiris looked toward the light. "You see me always. I am the memory behind your thoughts, the calm in your judgment, the mercy in your strength. When you listen, I am there." The light around him began to brighten. Horus felt the dream begin to fade. He reached out, but his hand touched only warmth, like sunlight on still water. Then he was awake. The terrace was quiet, the stars pale in the coming dawn. The river gleamed below, and for a moment, the mist over its surface took the shape of a figure standing still and smiling. Horus breathed deeply, and the weight in his chest eased. He rose and looked toward the horizon. The first light of morning spread over the land like a blessing. The people would soon wake, the fields would open to the sun, and life would begin its quiet rhythm once more. He turned to the river and whispered, "I will remember." And far below the earth, Osiris smiled, for the world above and the world below had spoken to one another again. The dream lingered in Horus's heart for many days. He ruled with gentleness, his judgments guided by silence as much as by speech. When he looked at the stars, he no longer sought meaning. He simply listened to their light. The river flowed on, carrying its eternal song, and the world once more remembered its rhythm. Time, in the realm of Osiris, was not measured by the passing of suns or moons, but by the rhythm of the river. It flowed endlessly through the fields of peace, bending and glimmering as though it remembered every life it had ever touched. Some said it began at the first breath of creation and ended nowhere, vanishing only when it reached the heart of light. Osiris often walked beside that river when the souls of the just were quiet. The air there was softer than silence, and the stars above the duet burned faintly, reflected in the water like distant memories. He felt no burden in those moments, only a vast and gentle knowing. One day as he stood watching the current, a voice spoke beside him. It was not Anubis or Mot or any of the gods who kept the balance. It was the river itself. "Do you know where I go, Lord of the living and the dead?" it whispered, its voice like many streams speaking as one. Osiris smiled faintly. "You go where all things go, to transformation." The river shimmered. "I go beyond the stars. I carry the echoes of all hearts, the laughter of children, the final sigh of the dying. I take them to the place where beginnings sleep." Osiris listened. The words filled him with both peace and wonder. "Then you are the path between all that has been and all that will be." "I am what you once were," said the river. "The pulse that joined heaven and earth. When you judged, you did not punish, you reminded. When you spoke, the worlds listened. You have walked long beside me, Osiris. Have you ever wondered what lies beyond my last curve?" He looked into the glow where the water vanished into mist. "No," he said softly. "To know the mystery would end it. It is enough to walk its edge." The river's light brightened. "You are content?" "Yes," he said. "Because the flow continues. Because even when the stars fade, their light remains in memory." The water sighed, a sound like wind through endless reeds. "Then walk with me once more." He stepped forward. The current touched his feet, cool and welcoming. The souls who rested nearby looked up and smiled, though they did not understand. The gods who watched from their thrones bowed their heads, for they knew this was not an ending, but a continuation. Osiris walked into the river. The water rose around him, yet he did not sink. The glow deepened until the boundary between river and light vanished. He turned once and looked back upon the fields of peace, upon the lotus ponds and silver reeds, upon the souls who had trusted him. His gaze lingered with tenderness. Then he looked forward, where the light grew wider and softer until it was no longer light but something greater, an endless openness. He heard voices there, faint at first, then clearer, the voices of all who had ever lived, all who would ever live. They were not speaking words, but music, woven together in a harmony so perfect that even silence joined it. Osiris smiled. "So this is where the river goes." He took one more step, and the light embraced him. For an instant, the whole duet shimmered, and even the stars above the earth brightened. Those who dreamed on the surface world stirred, feeling peace settle upon their hearts without knowing why. In the palace by the Nile, Isis woke. She rose and went to the balcony, her eyes fixed upon the river. The night was clear, and the water gleamed like liquid starlight. She felt the faintest warmth upon her skin, like a farewell and a promise. She whispered, "The river flows on." Far below, beyond the stars, Osiris had not vanished. He had become the current itself, the endless thread connecting life, death, and the dream between them. His presence moved in every breath of wind, in every drop of rain that kissed the earth, in every tide that returned faithfully to the shore. And so it was said, even among the living, that when the river glowed softly beneath the moon, the Lord of the eternal kingdom was walking home once more. The world above slept in peace. The stars turned, the river sang, and the balance of love and silence continued forever. The voice that closed the story of Osiris was not a god's voice, nor a mortal's. It was the voice of the world itself, quiet and endless, like breath moving through eternity. It spoke softly, not to be heard but to be felt. Once, it said, there was darkness, and within that darkness a pulse began. That pulse became a river, and the river became the world. From its waters rose light and sound, birth and death, all dancing together in the same rhythm. The gods were born, the stars learned their paths, and the first souls began to dream. Among those dreams walked Osiris, who learned that the river of time was not to be conquered, but to be guided. He taught the world that death was not a wall, but a doorway, and that every ending was only a bend in the current. He showed the living that kindness weighs nothing, that truth shines brighter than gold, and that love is stronger than stone. When he was betrayed, he did not curse. When he was scattered, he did not fade. When he was buried, he did not sleep. He flowed, through the hands of Isis, through the tears of Nephthys, through the breath of Horus, through the heart of every living thing that still remembered light. He became the quiet in which all things return to themselves. The river that runs through the earth is his memory. The green fields that rise after the flood are his forgiveness. The soft wind that stirs the reeds at dusk is his whisper. The beating of your heart, the pause between two breaths, the silence that holds your dreams, all these are his voice. The voice continued, "Do not fear the turning of time. Do not hold too tightly to what was. The river remembers you even when you forget yourself. When you are lost, be still. The current will find you. In the fields of peace, the souls walk without shadows. They carry only light, and every step they take becomes part of the song." Osiris listens to that song, and it becomes the rhythm of the stars. High above, on the surface of the world, the river still flows. The people of the Nile wake each morning to the glimmer of dawn on water, and though they no longer see the god who walks beneath it, they feel his presence in every renewal. Each season he returns, and with him, the promise that life never truly ends. When night falls and the moon paints the river with silver, the land listens. Somewhere, a mother sings her child to sleep. Somewhere, a prayer drifts upward like a feather. And somewhere, unseen but near, Osiris smiles, for the world is dreaming again, and the dream is gentle. The wind carries his name across the water, soft, eternal, like the beginning of a lullaby. And the river answers, always the same, always new. And when the story had been told 1,000 times, the world still listened. For myths are not memories, they are breathing things. They do not live in the past, they live wherever someone closes their eyes and hears the river. The Nile moved softly under the stars. Its waters gleamed like liquid moonlight, each wave carrying a whisper of all the stories ever spoken. Fishermen resting on its banks swore they could hear voices beneath the surface, gentle voices that spoke of forgiveness, of journeys, of love that outlasts death. Children born beside its waters dreamed of green fields that never faded, of a quiet man crowned in gold and wrapped in calm, who waited by a shining shore. It was said that when the moon was high and the air was very still, Osiris walked the banks unseen. He left no footprints, but the reeds bent after him as though bowing to a passing wind. Sometimes the people would leave offerings, a handful of grain, a lotus flower, a cup of clear water, and the river would carry them away. The next morning, the fields would gleam brighter, and the air would feel lighter, as though the earth itself had taken a long, peaceful breath. The years passed as years must, yet nothing truly changed. The kingdoms rose and fell, the sands shifted, the cities turned to dust. But the river remembered. It whispered the old songs to every generation that came to drink from it. And those who listened closely understood. The gods had not gone. They had simply become the things that never end: water, wind, light, silence. Osiris's voice was now the rhythm of the current, steady and patient. Isis's touch was the moonlight on the river's face. Horus's eyes were the stars that guided travelers through the dark. Even Seth's shadow, softened by time, moved across the dunes not in rage, but as part of the eternal balance. All of them still there, still turning together in the slow dance of the world. At dawn the river met the sun. The horizon burned gold, and the light spread over the water like an opening eye. In that brightness the whole story could be seen at once. The life, the death, the searching, the rising again, not as separate moments but as one endless motion, like a breath that never stopped. And the voice of the world, old and kind, spoke once more. What you call ending is only rest. What you call loss is only change. You are part of the river, and the river flows through all things. Be still and you will remember. The wind carried those words through the valley. They brushed the palms, rippled the water, and drifted across the sleeping villages. The people did not wake, but their dreams deepened. Some dreamed of stars reflected in water, some of a green field and a quiet God waiting with open hands. And when morning came, they rose feeling lighter, as though they had returned from a long journey home. The river flowed on. The world turned. And somewhere in the stillness between them, Osiris smiled. The soul awoke to the sound of water. It did not know where it had come from, nor what name it had once carried, only that it was floating upon a wide and gentle river that shone without source or end. The air smelled faintly of lotus and rain. The current rocked it as a mother rocks a child. At first there was silence, the kind of silence that is full, not empty, and then a voice rose from the water. It was low and soft, like the murmur of reeds in wind. Do you know who you are? The soul hesitated. I was someone once, I think. I remember laughter, warmth, and the color of morning. The river seemed to smile. That is enough. You remember light. Am I dead? You are between, said the river. You have left the shore of breath, but you have not yet reached the fields of peace. Do not hurry. The current moves when you are ready. The soul looked down. Beneath the surface it saw shapes drifting. Faces, hands, the faint glow of other souls. They were not lost, only resting, moving slowly with the tide. Where does it go? The soul asked. Everywhere, the river answered. It flows through all worlds, through dreams and memory. You have crossed it many times before and will cross it again. Each journey brings you closer to what you have always been. The soul was quiet for a long while. Then softly, and what is that? Love, said the river. You were made of it as all things were. It is what moves even the gods. They drifted in silence again. The soul watched the light shifting upon the water, turning from silver to gold to soft blue. At moments it thought it heard music in the distance, a single tone that rose and fell with the current, so pure that it made the heart ache. Is that heaven? The soul whispered. It is remembering, said the river. Heaven is only the moment you remember who you are. The current deepened. The soul felt itself being carried faster, not with fear, but with calm. Images began to rise from the water, the faces it had loved, the moments of joy, even its mistakes. None hurt now, they were all part of the same brightness. Do they forgive me? They already have, said the river. They were you as you were them. The river keeps no separation. The light ahead grew wider, spreading like dawn. The river's voice became almost a whisper. When you reach the light, you will forget me for a time. But that is well. I will be the breath in your next life, the rhythm beneath your heartbeat. You will find me again. The soul closed its eyes. Will I remember this? You will remember peace, said the river, and that will be enough. The light opened before it, and the water carried the soul onward, weightless and whole. The river sang softly to itself, a song older than the stars. Far away on the surface of the waking world, the Nile moved gently under the morning sun. The breeze stirred the reeds, and the sound they made was the same as the river's song, the same lullaby that had carried a soul to rest. And somewhere in the stillness beneath, Osiris listened, smiling as another traveler found the way home. The river was quiet that night. The stars above the duet burned with a steady light, and the water reflected them perfectly, as if heaven itself had bent down to rest upon the surface. Yet within that stillness, something stirred. A ripple, faint at first, then growing wider. A new soul had arrived. But unlike the others, it did not float easily. It clung to the edge of the current, refusing to drift forward. The water lapped gently around it, urging it onward, but the soul's shape trembled with resistance. Come, said the river, its voice calm and patient. The journey continues. The soul turned, and its voice was heavy with longing. I can't, it said. Someone waits for me. I feel them still. Their breath, their tears. If I go on, I will lose them. The current swirled softly as though thinking. You will not lose them, it said. You will become the space in which they live. But the soul shook its head. They need me. Their grief calls me back. If I listen, I can still hear it. And indeed, in the distance, far above, where the world of the living shimmered faintly, a single thread of sound reached through the dark. It was the voice of a woman, quiet but unbroken, whispering into the night. It was a prayer, a name. The river sighed. Love that clings becomes pain. Love that flows becomes peace. Do you wish to comfort her or bind her? The soul hesitated. Its light flickered, caught between yearning and release. I only wish to keep her safe. Then let the river carry you, said the voice, for it carries her too. The current that moves through you now will reach her heart. Every tear she sheds returns to me, and I will bear your touch within it. The soul listened. The sound of the river deepened, and in its depths it could hear the woman's breath, slow, aching, but steady. She sat by the water's edge in the living world, her hands clasped, her eyes on the stars. Her tears fell into the river, and the river carried them down, where they shimmered in the light of the underworld. Do you see, whispered the current? She does not cry alone. Her grief is your bridge, not your chain. Through her love you are still moving. The soul felt the truth of it, the gentle tug of the water, the rhythm that pulsed through both worlds. Slowly, it loosened its grasp on the shore. What will happen to her? It asked. She will remember, said the river. Not your name, perhaps, but the warmth that name once carried. She will walk in sunlight again, and in that light, a part of you will walk beside her. The river carried the next soul in silence. It came slowly, moving as though weighed down by shadow. Its light was dim, its edges blurred. When it reached the bend where the reeds whispered, it stopped and drifted in place. Why do you hesitate? Asked the river. The soul's voice was small. I am afraid. Of what? Of being seen. The river rippled gently. There is nothing here but truth. And truth does not wound, it reveals. But the soul drew back trembling. I have done things I wish forgotten. I hurt others. I betrayed trust. I was cruel when I might have been kind. How can such a heart be weighed and not be lost? From the golden mist ahead came a soft radiance. The river slowed, and the voice that spoke next was not its own. It was Osiris. His tone was quiet, like sunlight through still water. Child of the world, he said, you mistake judgment for punishment. The weighing of the heart is not to condemn, it is to free. Truth must be seen or it cannot become light. The soul's glow wavered. If my heart is heavy, I will sink. Osiris stepped closer, his form half light, half shadow. Then you will sink into my hands, he said gently, and I will lift you again. The measure is not perfection. It is honesty. The scales appeared beside him, gleaming softly. Upon one plate lay the feather of Mot, bright as dawn. Upon the other, the heart of the trembling soul. For a moment, the weight seemed uneven, the heart pressing low, full of memory. But Osiris reached out and touched it, and at his touch, the heart began to glow. Do you see? He murmured. Your sorrow is also light. Regret is love remembered too late, but still love. It means you have awakened. Slowly the scales leveled. The soul's trembling eased. The shadow that had clung to it fell away, dissolving into the air like smoke in sunlight. The voice of the river rose again, soft and low. Forgiveness is not a gift you must earn, it is the current itself. You were never meant to carry your pain forever. Let it rest. The soul felt the weight leave it completely. Its light grew brighter, until it was as clear as the surface of the river itself. I remember now, it said. All the faces I harmed, all the words I should have spoken. They are not gone. They are part of me. Then you are whole, said Osiris. The soul bowed. Where do I go? To the fields, said the river. To the green places where light never fades. Go now, not to escape but to begin again. The soul drifted forward. As it passed into the gold horizon, its voice lingered, faint but peaceful. Thank you. Osiris watched until the light was gone. He turned to the river. It never ends, he said quietly. No, whispered the current. But neither does love. And the duet fell silent once more. A silence full of life, of movement, of every word unspoken yet already understood. Far above, the Nile shimmered under the first light of dawn. A fisherman stirred in his small boat, feeling a sudden calm he could not name. The water touched his hand, cool and kind, and in that simple moment, the story of Osiris continued, not in temples or scrolls, but in the breath of the living and the stillness of the earth. The river flowed on, and the world, forever turning, whispered back. All things return. All things flow. All things are forgiven. The river had spoken its last word, yet its echo still shimmered across the world. The story of Osiris, the god who died, who rose, who became the eternal current, had moved through time itself, flowing beneath every breath of the living. Now the light of dawn touched both worlds at once, the golden fields of the Duat below and the green valley of the Nile above. The two realms, heaven and earth, breathed together, one heartbeat, one rhythm. In the quiet before sunrise, the gods gathered one last time. Isis stood beside the river, her veil of stars lifting in the soft wind. Horus, her son, the falcon-eyed king of the living, bowed his head to her. Anubis, keeper of the gates, walked the banks in silence, his torch burning blue in the dim light. And from the heart of the horizon, the water began to glow. It rose not as a flood but as light, gentle, golden, endless. From its surface, a figure emerged, calm and radiant, crowned with the green of the earth and the white of the lotus. Osiris had returned not as a man, not as a god of death, but as the soul of the river itself, the thread that wove all life together. Every god bowed. Every soul stilled. Even the wind forgot its sound. He looked upon the world, and his voice moved through it like the tide. My name was once spoken in fear, then in love, then in silence. But I was never gone. I was the seed that sleeps, the dawn that follows the dark, the stillness between two heartbeats. Wherever there is life, there I am. He lifted his hands, and the river shimmered from horizon to horizon, joining the realms of the living and the dead. No longer two worlds, only one, bound by memory, by love, by endless becoming. Isis stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears that shone like stars. The cycle is whole, she whispered. Osiris smiled. And peace is forever. The gods faded into the light. The water stilled. The sky opened like an eye awakening. Above, the Nile gleamed brighter than ever, and the first rays of the sun touched its surface, turning it into a river of gold. The people of Egypt rose from their sleep. They saw the light upon the water and felt something in their hearts, a warmth, a calm, an understanding. They did not know its name, but they bowed to it all the same. And as the sun climbed higher, the voice of the world spoke one final time. The story of Osiris never ends. For every leaf that falls, every river that runs, every heart that dares to love again, he lives. He flows. He returns. The screen fades to black. The last sound is the soft murmur of water, the sound of the river that never sleeps. Then, in quiet white letters, appears the final line. All things return. All things flow. All things are one. The music fades. The river continues. And the story rests, but never ends.